Good afternoon, and you're very welcome to the Mad, Bad and Dangerous webinar this evening. My name is Sarah McInerney and I'm a journalist and broadcaster with RTÉ, and I'm delighted to be your host for this evening. So, Mad, Bad and Dangerous, what a wonderful title that is, and indeed what a suitable title it is to describe in the best way the wonderfully difficult women that we're going to be speaking with and speaking about this evening. And for any of you who may have missed the first series of Mad, Bad and Dangerous, first of all, where have you been? But second of all, it was a compilation of interviews with some remarkable Irish women over the age of 70. And I have to say, it provided for me some of the most thought-provoking and inspiring we've seen in a very long time. At the heart of it all is the art of listening and giving space for these wonderful women to be heard. There's minimal editing in this series. So as Margaretta Darcy so eloquently described in episode 2, we all get the opportunity where out of the pain of boredom, we can suddenly wake up. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to all wake up, listen to our eminent guests this evening. And we're joined by Emma O'Grady, the producer of Mad, Bad and Dangerous, who came up with this wonderful idea. We'll be speaking to her in a short while about how she came up with the idea. Lelia Doolan, who's director and producer of the award-winning documentary Bernadette, Notes on a Political Journey. Lelia has done so much more, but I can't go through it all with you now. Dr. Lorraine Grimes is a postdoctoral researcher in the Social Science Institute at Maynooth University. She's working on the project Digital Preservation of Reproductive Health Resources, Archiving the Eighth. And Ingle, whose memoir Open Hearted was recently nominated for 2 book awards. Dr. Michaela Schrage-Frueh, who's a lecturer in the School of Languages, Literatures and Cultures at NUI, and Dr. Maggie O'Neill, who's a researcher in the Irish Centre for Sociology at NUI also. And you're all very welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Emma, like I said, I might start with yourself because you contacted me last year actually about Mad, Bad and Dangerous Series 1, and at the time I wasn't available to be involved. I'm so delighted to be here today. But at the time, you sent me on some of the links, and I was blown away just with the concept and what you were doing. And I wondered, why has no one done this before? I wonder, how did you come up with the idea? What inspired you?
Well, it's often with something like this. Yeah, when you said where did the idea come from? It doesn't come from. It's. I wish it had been done before, and it was one of those ideas that came along when it was just so obvious that you had to do it. I kind of feel like I work in theatre normally, and I write and I perform, and I've got very kind of clear ideas and projects I work on, and you know, ideas that I'm working on that way. But when this came along, it was just like I'm a servant to it. It's like, oh, I have to do this. I literally was, oh fuck, I have to do this because it has to be done, you know. So how it came about, well, genuinely, like from watching Lelia Doolan going around Galway and watching what she's been doing, and maybe just being fascinated by like how is she doing what she's doing and how is she still going. And then there was a brilliant thing in NUI at the end of 2019. It was the launch of Siobhan McKenna's archives, and Lelia and Margaret McCurtain were in conversation as part of that kind of event. And I just remember looking at the stage, and I don't know if Margaret was quite 90 at that stage, but you were both in your 80s, and like it was just amazing. It was about an hour-long discussion of like 2 women in their 80s with no young person, no interviewer, no journalist asking them questions and trying to kind of put into a box their lives, or you know, they knew each other already, so there was like a trust there anyway, and it was just funny, and it was brilliant. And then in the audience, there was loads of women in the audience who were older women who then were asking questions about the time that Lelia and Margaretta were talking about, and about Siobhan McKenna and stuff like that. Anyway, so I just remember walking home from that going, wow. And then a couple of weeks later, I was at an event that Lara Hickey, who's one of the producers of Mad, Bad and Dangerous, she ran an event called Cross Pollinator, and there was a woman speaking at that, Deirdre Roycroft. And at the end of what she said, I think she's in her 40s, but she said, I hope that, well, when I'm 80, I still have a voice and I'm still in the room to use it. And it was just those two things. I just went, oh, we have to, where are all the older women artists, and how can I create a space for influential older Irish women who are still active, still are working and working in activism and in all their areas that they're working in, to sit and talk to each other. So then I met Lelia, and I spent months trying to persuade her to do it, and then here we are.
So Lelia, why did it take months to be persuaded to do this?
It did not, did it? God, Emma, you're an awful chancer. Honest to God, I love the hair, by the way. It's looking very wild this morning. Yes, how, why? Yeah, listen, I mean, all kinds of things were going on, I suppose. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I just thought, what do we need any more talk for? You know, I haven't really said enough already, at least for the moment. So anyway, she's a persuasive young one. So I said, okay. So off we went. And sure, Margareta is like a bucking bronco. I'm trying to interview Margareta. I was talking to her the other day, and she said, I took you by surprise, didn't I? I said, how do you mean? Oh, you had a whole set of questions all ready for me, but I wasn't going to answer any of them. I said, you might have told me beforehand. I wouldn't have wasted my time. Anyway, that was Margareta. She was mighty. So yeah, we went at it. And since I had done the Bernadette documentary, and we had become friends over the years of doing it, Bernadette, I said, do you want a rematch? And you can be the interrogator on this occasion. And she said, absolutely. I want to get my own back. I don't think she did, actually. You know, I thought she was pretty hopeless as an interviewer.
And what do you think of the concept, Lelia, that Emma is talking about there? This idea that there are women of your generation who have so much to say, who to a large extent aren't being given a space to say it, or even if they are, they're not being heard.
Listen, I mean, this is a competitive society. It's amazing that anybody gets heard, in actual fact. Sarah, do you get heard? Yes, you do, every day. But I think it's a very weird world that we live in. You know, people are celebrities for a month or a minute, and then they're not. So for people like me, you just keep going. You know, you have a project, you're trying to get it off the ground, and you keep at it until it works. And that's all. That's quite simple. With anything I've done, I'd regard Mad, Bad and Dangerous as a compliment. You know, but I wouldn't ever have regarded myself as either dangerous or bad, but mad perhaps, yes. You know, I mean, if you look back at the things you've been at, you think, oh heavens, what did I think I was doing? How did I think I was going to get away with that? But you know, so far so good.
It certainly is so far so good. Lorraine, I might come to you then on how we got to where we are now, and if we century, and a lot of the women that we're talking to and talking about today would have, you know, spent a lot of their lives in the last century, where women's fight for equality, so much of it was tied up with reproduction. I think you could argue a lot of it still is tied up with reproduction. And I know as part of your work, you've been looking in detail about the 20th century, particularly mother and baby homes in Britain, and how that, I suppose, would have influenced women of that generation and their voice and how they viewed life. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? And obviously that would have been very much mirrored here.
Absolutely, yeah. So really I came into that project thinking about the women's stories and wanting to make that their voices central to the research. So that involved interviewing women who had travelled over to England as an unmarried mother during the 20th century. So from 1926 till the end of the 1970s. And there's just so much secrecy and shame around that aspect of Ireland's past, with the mother and baby homes and migration as well. So yeah, I think, you know, looking through the archival records and trying to find Irish women amongst the records, and trying to put them central to the research, and then speaking to the women as well, you could see that you know, even with the Commission's report, you know, back in 2020, you know, it's just they're still fighting to be heard. You know, they're still not really given a space to be heard. And as well, you know, with the Adoption Act that's come out just recently, they're still denied access to institutional records, and researchers and people who've been in institutions, they deserve to know, to get the full extent of what actually went on in the institutions, and they deserve to be heard, you know. Yeah, it's still very much ongoing. I mean, we have repealed the 8th now, and as I was doing that research, I was thinking, you know, I was flying over to London and Liverpool and going to archives and researching, I suppose, the historical aspect of it. And, you know, I was doing this research around 2015, 2016, prior to the 2018 referendum. And next to me on the plane could have been someone who was travelling over for an abortion, for full reproductive health care. And I just think any instance where a woman needs to leave the country for full access to reproductive health care is a failure of the state. We've repealed the 8th now, but we know that there's still women travelling right now. You know, access under the legislation in terms of fatal fetal abnormality is very, very restrictive. And, you know, it's still ongoing. So
yeah. Some really interesting research as well, coming out of the Oireachtas Committee, hearing on all of this, how the legislation is working recently about actually access to abortion in Ireland, even though it's meant to be, you know, equal, is not really, with a lot of GPs not offering it. I think half maternity hospitals not offering termination. So a lot to go on that, really, I think, certainly for people who are looking for free and equal access to abortion. But in terms of the mindset of women, would say in the last century, though, who would have been put into these institutions and really robbed of their autonomy and their voice, how does that then shape a woman, women as sort of maybe as a collective, if you can do that? How does that shape their worldview, do you think, and indeed society's view of women when that is happening?
yeah, I mean, those women who left Ireland, you know, to go to England, what they were trying to do was escape institutionalization. And really, when they ended up in England, what happened was they ended up in an institution there. So really, it wasn't really an escape. And there was forced adoptions from institutions in England as well. Ireland wasn't unusual in that. And I think that's something that really, you know, people in England haven't really delved into that aspect of their past yet. And it's something that needs to be further explored. But I mean, speaking to women who had their babies forcibly taken from them, it shaped their entire lives, and they've spent their entire lives trying to trace their children. Some have been successful and some have not. And, you know, it's just, then there's the struggles of unmarried motherhood as well. Some women did manage to keep their children, but it was an extremely difficult time to raise their child. You know, there was no supports in place. There was really no support from the state at all. So
well, I might bring on Ingle, because you have a very specific experience around this, don't you? Because you were married, but your husband died in very tragic circumstances, and you were left with 8 children to raise on your own. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience of that, and to what extent do you think being a woman changed that experience, made it more challenging? Do we have Anne? Or maybe Anne is on mute still.
Is that right?
There you are. Yeah, we've got you.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's more difficult. Did you read that other memoir that was published at the same time as mine? Actually beat me in that awards ceremony for on post. What do you call them? Did you know my mum is dead? By Seamus O'Reilly. There was a man who was left with, I think, 11 children, but he managed. He was a very stoic man. But speaking about myself, yes, my husband went and left us there. The eldest was 17 and the youngest was just 2. So it was difficult, but at the same time, we worked together, you know, as a team. That was the way I looked at it. I have a very extraordinary family. and they were all great people, and we worked together as a team. The only thing I regret about that particular, at the time when it happened, is that I didn't have any counselling or any help, you know, from anybody regarding how to deal with the loss. You know, I know there's many times the children would come into the room and see me crying over some record that some tune that come on the radio or something, and remind me of him. And but all those things happened. But as I say, they were brilliant children. They are still brilliant children. I'm very, very proud of them. And we got through it all together. There was more. It was harder, really, to tell you the truth, Sarah, when he was alive, because he suffered mental illness, and there's a stigma around mental illness then, and I believe still is probably. So that was hard, living with that, and that was hard for the children too, you know, to deal with a father who wasn't a father anymore. So we'd been through a lot already before he died. And look, I always say he died for us, you know, because our life was that much easier when he was gone. I don't know if that seems a good thing to say to people, but it was true. I do think that he died for us so that we could get on. I didn't want him to go, and I miss him still today. It was his birthday on the 1st of May. He would have been 83. But yeah, that's how we got on with it. You know, we just got on with it. No.
But I mean, I think, was it your son who said, or one of your sons who said that in the book he couldn't believe he didn't talk more about money. You know, and you're sort of doing that there again, where you're like, it was fine, we just got on with it, you know, which I think to a lot of people looking and thinking about trying to raise 8 children on your own, you know, if you had all the financial supports in the world, would be difficult. Never mind doing that, you know, with financial struggle.
Look, Sarah, the man I was married to was a very erratic earner, is a good term for it. I'd never had any stability anyway. And in fact, the widow's pension was a great source of stability to me. And then I did other work. I'd always done other work, minding other people's children. So from the financial point of view, never had anything anyway. So it didn't really, it was not as if a man who was working as a bank manager died and, you know, you were bereft. In fact, you probably would have been okay with that, the pension or something. But anyway, no, the money end of it, yes, okay, that's hard, but it's more the emotional things and getting on with things. And that's what I did. I kind of threw myself into work in the community as well. I did a lot of work in the community and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm not trying to minimize the trauma of it all, but at the same time, that's what life gives you, isn't it? You know, you have to deal with what life brings you, and we got on with it. We did. And they're all very happy and successful people now, and I'm very, as I say, very happy for them to have achieved all they've achieved, you know.
Lelia, what do you think of all of that and that resilience that I think so many Irish women have shown over the last, well, since forever, really? And Lelia, you might be on mute also, so you might need to unmute yourself.
Oh, I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think, you know, I was just thinking the other day about the kind of power blocks that think that they run the world, you know. These are the sort of systems like organized religions, military industrial complexes, and the penal system, the banking system, the big corporations who don't bother with laws, all the tax codes that are good for the wealthy and not for others, and the healthcare and the pharmaceutical industries, the general war economy in the world. And then I think of who are the people who actually keep the world alive. And they're people like Ingle. They're the people who actually make the world go round. And they're the people whose daily chores and daily lives and daily ability to get up and get on with horrors and sadness and every damn thing, they're absolutely the heroes. It's amazing that we put up with the rest of them. And that's what shocks me. We need to stand up and get the courage to speak out about these awful systems, you know, that have oppressed and denied people the beauty of their lives. That's, I suppose, what I think about my good fortune in having had one hell of a great bloody life. And of course there have been ups and downs, but generally speaking, you know, all you need is a friend. That's all you need in life. whether it's your partner or your children or your whoever. That's all anybody needs. And the courage to say no, the freedom in a way. A lot of people don't feel themselves to be free, and I think that's a great sadness.
Thanks, Lelia. We might look a little bit at where we are now, and Michaela, I might come to yourself on that, because I know yourself and Maggie have done a huge amount of work on giving a voice to older women. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your current project at the moment, which is on restoring aging. It's really interesting.
Yes, it's a project that ties in very well with the Mad, Bad and Dangerous project, and that we also try to give a space and a voice to older women that might not usually get that space in the media. And I think that may well be changing, that may have well changed over the past years, that there's actually more spaces for older people to express their subjective perspectives and stories and narratives. And in the project that we are currently conducting, we mainly look at life writing. So life writing by older women, representations in the media of older people and women in particular that can often be quite stereotypical, cliched, simplified, or older people can be simply invisible. I think with the current COVID-19 pandemic, that has become so obvious, the way that older people over a certain age were simply lumped together as the group of the vulnerable. And then that was very often accompanied by media images consisting of body parts. You know, you've certainly come across that, the wrinkly hand image. So you don't see the whole person, you just see the wrinkly hand, suggesting dependence, vulnerability, frailty. And so I think the Mad, Bad and Dangerous project is, of course, a wonderful kind of counterbalance to that, in that you really see the whole person connecting to their younger selves and their achievements. And in our project, we actually work together with a number of women from the general public. They could just sign up to contribute and to react to media images, to give their views on those images, and then also to react and respond to excerpts from life writing, older women's life writing, poetry, and so on, and just relate to that, give their own views on that. And then also we're conducting a life writing workshop that is actually led by writer Eilish Nguifne, where these women can then also kind of provide their own life writing in response to those images and narratives. So I think there's actually quite a nice connection here between the two projects.
Yeah, it's a beautiful idea. I wonder what sort of reaction are you getting, and what sort of stories are women writing?
Well, the creative writing workshop is still ongoing, so we haven't seen any of it. We're very, very curious to see the outcomes. But the poems and texts that we looked at with them were partly very funny kind of poems and pieces of life writing that partly make fun of certain cliches about that's currently, I just saw yesterday that there's a new hashtag out on Twitter, which is called Old and Ugly. Lots of women posting images of themselves under the hashtag Old and Ugly, because someone was actually accused of being that old and ugly. So it's this kind of often very funny and witty response to those kinds of cliches and stereotypes that tend to negate and basically erase older people and women in particular. And we're really hoping for some kind of short life writing texts along those lines, possibly, but also individual stories that can sometimes be quite sad, about situations of caring, about loss, about grief, losing your parents, losing your partner, and also violence. So hopefully quite a large array of stories that document the diversity what older people experience, what lives they look back to, and stories that can really enrich everyone's kind of perspective.
And Maggie, I might bring you in on this as well, because in the second series, I know Noreen Byrne, she makes reference to some wonderful poetry and literature from women. And I wonder how important you think that is, the cultural and literal representation of older women.
I think it's incredibly important. You know, Lelia mentioned that we live in a competitive society, and we live in this competitive, youth-oriented society that's, you know, putting so much pressure on women, especially younger women, and I feel it's so important to start to move away from that, in projects like Mad, Bad and Dangerous and Restoring Aging can help us to do that, because they contain this wealth of experience and perspective and wisdom that's unacknowledged, I think, you know, in the literature and culture that we receive most of the time. When we're in school, you know, I suppose these are, you know, the poems we didn't read in school, we could put it that way. Writers that haven't had their due recognition, and the voices we haven't heard. So much of the literature and the culture that we receive has stereotyped images of women, or women who aren't real living, breathing bodies, or, you know, don't have a voice, they're objectified. And it's so important that we hear the stories by and about older women, so that we can learn from their experiences, and that they can enrich our own lives.
And is it, sorry to interrupt you, but is it that there isn't a whole lot of that literature or poetry that exists, or is it that we don't know about it, we're not given access to it, it's not sort of mainstream?
It is. It's there, but it's not in the canon. It's not the literature that's typically, I suppose, studied and anthologized. It's, you know, there are more and more, I think, you know, really important works of literary recuperation coming out to bring these voices to the foreground, and it's just, I think it's so incredibly important. You know, as Lelia mentioned, that, you know, she mentioned giving us our courage and our freedom, and I think it's hearing the stories of older women that just you know, will just give us that freedom of expression for ourselves, so that if we don't hear it, we can't learn it and learn from it. And that's why I think those you know, that archival work and that anthologizing work is so important.
Also, Maggie, I think as well, like not just hearing the stories, but if projects like this can help, because Lelia mentioned friendship there, and I think intergenerational friendships are essential, like really essential in our lives. And like, we are here at this time when we're talking about the Ukraine and going, how can we forget that history, you know, how do we forget history? And it's happening again. But if we maintain strong friendships across generations, I think that we'll be better equipped to deal with that kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, there's that. It's very true. I'm also thinking of Dirne Griefa's Ghost in the Throat, and Eileen's courage in the great poem that she made. Nobody stopped her. Nobody would have stopped her. I've just been reading Elizabeth Boyle's amazingly refreshing, wonderful book called Fierce Appetites, which is all about love and passion and rage in mythologies, in the ancient legends. And Anna Marie Ní Chóráin, who's a poet from Donegal, her work is extraordinary in retrieving women from out of the darkness of the past. But Bealtaine is great. I mean, I have the misfortune of not thinking of myself as old, which is an awful pity, really. And so, you know, I was asked a couple of years ago, would I say something for Bealtaine? And I said, well, sure, I couldn't be doing that. I'm not old enough. I think they're still laughing. However, I did do it a few years ago. And I remember a friend of mine who is now dead, the darling, he said, I looked in the mirror the other day, And I thought, I'm getting younger. Now, he was 88 at the time. So I have to say, you know, one rolls along on fun and laughter and humor and wit. That's what keeps one going, you know, and the idiocies of one's own carry on.
And as well, like what I loved about what I learned from doing Mad, Bad and Dangerous was, and I learned a lot from you, Lelia, just watching you and watching the women with each other. How here's something that I was like, younger women do not do this, and the kind of, you know, online internet generation don't really do this, is that sit in a room with somebody that you love and have a fight with them about the issues and still, but don't fall out. Nobody gets cancelled. You know, it's the idea of actually having rows.
Very important.
Do that. We don't do it enough.
It's awfully, it's very important. I was happy enough to be brought up in a family where, you know, rows and argument was appreciated, and people did fall out with one another over issues, not over, you know, how you looked or what you said or anything of that kind. And I do think it's awfully important, and people shouldn't withdraw from it. And people shouldn't, if I'm not advising anybody, I have to say, be careful. Just look, there's an immense wealth and richness in life. I'm getting more and more of it every damn day. And I just want people to understand it's bloody brilliant. It's bloody brilliant. It's short enough. God knows I'm going to be gone in a few years. And the rest of you, please heaven, will have years and years to enjoy this. I mean, I look at Anne and I listen to Anne and my God, I bow down in homage to people. And I bow down in homage to many of the people who've suffered. You know, Margot, as I say, is making the film about the mother and baby son. And some of the stories will just break your heart. And there are also, we're going through such a time now. It's the anniversary of the Civil War. And I just heard the other day a wonderful, awful, sad documentary, which Fergal Keane made, a radio documentary about a man in Kerry who was assassinated, who was executed, they would say. These horrors that people have had perpetrated on them, and all kinds of indignities, and nevertheless, they get up, they smile, they tell a story, they go to the pub, they go on. It's like failing and failing better. Beckett is damn right. Keep going. You're doing fine.
You know, and on that point, Lelia, you've mentioned the word, and a couple of others have mentioned it as well a lot already, and that's the word courage. And having, and I might put another word in there as well, which is confidence. And I wonder, is that something that older women and men perhaps as well can struggle with when it comes to expressing themselves, or feeling like if they do try, they're going to be heard? Do you think is there an issue there to try and build up the courage and the confidence to do that? And this as well, but I'd be interested, Lelia, in what you have to say about it first.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are times when one thinks, oh, maybe I should have something to say about that, or perhaps I should have sent a letter to the Irish Times or said something, you know, and one realizes, who the hell is interested in what you have to say? Well, obviously you think it's quite important, but less and less. And also there is a perspective that one gets when one is a bit older. And that is a sense that things are relative, that not everybody can be heard all the time, that not everybody has the right words to say, and that I don't have the right words a lot of the time, and maybe all of the time perhaps. But the confidence that one got from one's parents, you see, that is the absolute gold standard for people. How lucky one is to have parents, to have two parents. Imagine that nowadays. And to have two parents who love each other and love you. I mean, this is absolutely wonderful. And in most parts of the world, that is the case. We just have a Ukrainian family now living in our village who came in a couple of weeks ago and are being minded by everybody in the village. And they are minding us as well. And they have 3 teenagers and a small child. And they are just resilient. And they have left behind, you know, things you couldn't even begin to contemplate the sadness of. So I just find, you know, politicians do their best, God help them. And I feel so sorry for so many of them who are trying. I think we have a decent enough government in many ways. We have an awful system in awful, awful capitalism. That's what happens. But now, to be heard, it's not that important, really, in a way. To perceive is very important, to connect everything. We have a field over at Mullaghmore. I don't want to keep on talking, but I think this small bit is interesting. And we plant a tree. We had a long campaign with the government against their building a visitor centre in a very unusual and beautiful part of the country where it wasn't needed. It could have been in a village. And in fact, in the end, we succeeded in persuading them that that was the case. Now, in a field that watches that mountain, we plant trees to those of us who have fallen, who are dead now. And in the last while, in that field, I think of all of those trees, there must be perhaps a dozen or more, with their roots going down into the earth, reaching out to one another under the earth. And that, in a way, is what we're doing all the time with one another, reaching out with our roots, with our tendrils, with our funny little attempts to be friends. And here it's happening in nature, among trees, among, you know, chipmunks and birds and all the creatures that are around, among the onions that we've just planted out in the garden. All of these great things, they keep one alive, you know. It's so essential to be heard.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful image that you're painting there. Connection, really, I suppose, is what you're talking about, isn't it? It's connection. And I might come to you then, like I said, on the issue of courage and confidence and maybe connection as well. And you know, you published your first book at 82. Like that takes some serious courage and confidence. You know, I have often wanted to write a book and I still haven't built up the courage to do it. Was it difficult to build yourself up to do that? And what sort of reaction did you get from people? You might be on mute, Anne. You might still.
Don't want to lose you. You're great.
Okay. We'll wait for a second. We'll
Yeah, we paused. Yeah, pause there.
No problem.
Yeah, take your time. And Sarah, how are you managing? Are you doing drive time and the Tuesday night thing still?
Yeah.
And do you find that mix easy?
Well, on Tuesdays I don't do drive time, so I'm only on prime time on Tuesdays. But you know, it's busy.
It's busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the other things. One has more time when one is a bit older. One thing. Yeah. But one doesn't really, because people come along like Emma O'Grady with ideas.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Like you said.
Stop.
You said, yeah, because we had this, you were difficult about doing this. And that's the thing about this whole thing. Like every time I go to do this, every time I sit down to shoot an episode of it, I go, oh, Jesus, I forgot. I purposely selected difficult women. Like what? And I have to deal with that. And what's really interesting is that difficult, yes, every single one of them, but never in a what you might call, people would use that word diva way. Nothing about their personal kind of thing. It's like they're difficult because they want to interrogate me about what the fuck I'm doing and why I'm doing this, or the issue or the thing that needs to be sorted out. It's never a fickle concern, like, you know, and it's really challenging and it's brilliant. Like, you were like, when I asked you to do this, you were like, why is this important? I said, this is really important. And you're like, why is this important? It's not important. Nobody wants to sit down and listen to a load of owl ones talking to each other. And I said, it is important because it's important to do it now, because you're very old and you're going to die soon. And you said, well, maybe that's true. Okay, right.
Absolutely. No, I was thinking the other day, I wish that Lady Gregory was still alive, because she'd have been a great woman to do Mad, Bad and Dangerous. She really would. I was talking to Colin Smythe, who's now going to edit, he's our publisher. I mean, the publisher who's published all of her writings, and he's just doing
Fine.
all her writings. Oh, here she is. Good. Oh,
Here we
look,
are.
great.
Can you hear me as well?
Yeah,
We can hear you fine, Anne, yeah.
I can't see you, but maybe.
I see a tiny little you.
I turn off the phone now. Thank you.
You're talking to us on the phone now, are you?
I'm talking to you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, and we don't need to see you. If we can hear you, that's perfect, sure. And I don't know if you heard my just before the technical issues, but I was asking you about a lot of what Lelia was saying about connection, but also about this issue of courage and confidence when you're sort of going out into the world of presenting something as personal as a book, and particularly something as personal as a memoir, you know,
Yes.
and doing that at the age of 82.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, how did you get that confidence?
I know. I really don't know the answer to that, Sarah, but I was so delighted that actually somebody wanted me to write the book. And then when people started to read it, I was even more excited. So that energized me. And I have no problem talking to anybody about the book or going anywhere. I've had several book clubs ask me to go and join them to talk. And that's been wonderful. So I'm really, really happy to do that. And yeah, it's the idea of being recognized, because, you know, who am I? I'm nobody. I mean, somebody in the street asked me to judge a cake sale the other day, if you wouldn't be minding. You know, I'm suddenly a celebrity at this age of my life because I wrote a book for Rosemary Smith, who is another wonderful older woman. She's had a wonderful life rallying and racing driving. So I wrote her memoir for her as a ghostwriter, but I was very invisible at that. It was all Rosemary. But then when I came to write my own, and I got such a great feedback from people, it seemed to resonate with a lot of people, young and old, actually. So that really, I said, God, they like me. It's great. I'll talk to them. I'll do anything. And it did give me confidence doing that. But before that, I was just an old lady going along the street and just like everybody else. And well, not because we're all unique. It's not exactly true, just like everybody else, because every one of us, young and old. But I do think it's wonderful if what I've done gives confidence to other older women to know that they can be heard and they can do things, you know. So
and the process of writing it, was that important to you, or did it bring up a lot of emotions for you, and was it helpful to you to sort of let it all out as such, you know, to get it all down?
Yeah, I did it as really a homage to my husband in a way, you know, because I wanted his story to be told. So I wrote it with that in mind, but it was cathartic. And even more so, I actually read the book. I narrated the book, you know, for Audible. So that was more emotional even when I actually had to say my own words, and especially the hard times when Peter took his own life, and that day that happened, that essay on that was really difficult. But yes, cathartic is a way of saying that it did help me. It made me relive it all, of course, because a lot of the times you just push these things down, you get on with your life and say, well, that happened, it's gone, I can't do anything about it and all that. But having to confront it like that, yeah, it brought it all back up again. And as I say, it was his birthday on the 1st of May, and he would have been 83. I don't know what he'd have been like now, though. That's the thing. I have to look at his brothers. Some of them are still alive, and say, oh, you know, that's what he would have been like.
And Michaela and Maggie, I might go back to you just briefly on this then, when we hear from Anne and how much it meant to her and what it's done for her, and women looking at her in terms of just going out there and just doing it. Is that sort of what you're trying to get at, or part of what you're trying to get at with the project that you're working on? And what would you say to any older Irish women who might be watching this and thinking, I'd love to, but it's not for me, or who am I to do that?
I think it's so inspiring listening to Anne. If we go back to, we mentioned generational connection earlier, and you know, I think Anne mentioned how gives constant, you know, this work that has given confidence to her, but also, you know, to other women. And there's these, you know, these role models, these, you know, they affect our views on our own age, and so that we know that, you know, as women of any age, we have our whole life course. We don't have to be under pressure to hit every milestone that we want to achieve before we're 30 or before we're 40 or before we're 50 or reach a certain age. And, essentially, I think, and one of the things that these projects put across is that that to take the pressure off, we don't have to do that. We have our whole lives, and it's never too late to pick up a pen and to tell your story.
Yes, and also perhaps if I can chime in here, also not to having to actually adhere to a particular kind of narrative. So you can also deviate from that. You don't have to have a very positive aging experience even. So it's not like you have to be great and fit and active or whatever. I found it very touching, especially in the episode with Nell McCafferty, when she said at the end, well, there's not a lot of joy in my life currently, and I suffer from cognitive decline, the way she put it, like can't put two coherent thoughts together. That was very sad on the one hand, but I thought it was also very courageous to admit that and to not try to actually fit into that idea that you have to be active, you have to be fit, and you have to comply with a specific image that is propagated. So I think the idea that there's a whole lot of diversity and that everyone is different and everyone has their own subjective experience, and some people may start writing at 80 and others may not feel like doing that. I think that is really important to bring across.
One of the shows.
Sorry, go ahead.
Because I kind of come from theatre, and I made a show a few years ago called "What Good Is Looking Well When You're Rotten on the Inside," which was it's kind of, I suppose, my way to just explain that I haven't just come from into intergenerational artwork out of nowhere. It kind of seems to be a theme in a lot of my work. But so my grandfather, it was about my grandfather. He died when I was 12, and a month before he died, he asked for a tape recorder, and he went into a room, and for the last month there's 15 hours of him on cassette tape telling stories, fictional stories, not personal stories about his life, ideas he had for plays and poems and short stories. And then he died, and the tapes were just left there. We found plays he wrote in the 1950s and never showed anybody. He was a civil servant all his life. He was a difficult man, is what people would describe him. He didn't tell us stories. We didn't know he had all this in him. And so then I made a show years later about it. I always called the show like a tribute and a warning, because we do this, put out his writing and it's all beautiful and wonderful, but it's really sad that he waited until the very end of his life to do it, but didn't actually make it public, So I think when people have something to give and something to say, no matter what time they let it out, if they're keeping it in, then it causes damage. Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, Emma, and not keeping it in, and the way you've given a platform really for people to get it out and in the most sort of organic way, the way you've done it. Can you talk to us about what's coming next then in the next season?
So we're currently kind of in the middle of season 2. So when this webinar goes out, both episode 1 and episode 2 from season 2 will be released. So episode 1 is Anne Rossiter and Noreen Byrne. So and season 2, I suppose, which is funded by the Irish Research Council, has a kind of a slant on it. If season 1 was influential Irish women who stayed in Ireland and fought the fight in Ireland, season 2 is focusing on women who went to England and are abroad, or I kind of in our minds we're kind of calling it women in exile, who just went, fuck this, I'm getting out of here. So Anne Rossiter is in conversation with Noreen Byrne. So Anne Rossiter is one of the founders of the London Irish Women's Abortion Support Group, and then Noreen worked for the Well Woman Clinic on this side. So it's almost like she was doing the work on this side and Anne was doing the work on the other side. And then the other one then is Lucia Fitzgerald, who was interested with Lorraine's work, because a lot of these episodes and all of these things come back to the mother and baby home phenomenon. So Lucia Fitzgerald was born in a mother and baby home in Ireland. Now she's based in Manchester now, and she ran away to Manchester, and she's done incredible work her whole life, incredible LGBT rights activist. And she's been in conversation with Alva Smith, so kind of similar person doing the work on this side. Yeah, and then next is like my anxiety constantly going, I need to get that person, I need to get that person, I need to get that person. And it's a race, you know, because, you know, and not to be kind of flippant about it, but, you know, the age is a factor for the women that I want to feature. And we really were met with it, like Lelia, weren't we? Like 2 weeks before Margaret McCurtain died, we had cameras set up and ready to go in her convent nursing home, and she wasn't able to come out that morning. She wasn't well, and she died a couple of weeks later. So, and we never got to film her. So, so it's real, like it's a real fight. And you know, I don't want to do this work on my own. We all should be doing this work. So I would just say, like, people just record the older people in your life, like, you know, and we have so much to learn, like, and yeah. And then, do you know what's interesting? I was just thinking there, like, you know, it's all great and we can celebrate this and go, yeah, Mad, Bad and Dangerous, and it's brilliant, and everybody who supports the project and watches it is really behind it, but it's really a small amount of people. Like, nobody's banging down the door to broadcast it, like nobody's, you know, so these voices are still marginalized, you know. So I would just say we need to,
yeah,
I want more money and I want to do more episodes.
That's okay. I think that's good. But anyway, and you're a force. I mean, I met Emma when she was starting out with this great on the outside, rotten on the inside, kind of her grandpa's craps last tapes, which were actually amazing. And she's going to do another play now called Oh My Grief, I've Lost Him Surely, which she shouldn't be bothering about. Anyway, but the thing I wanted to say was, yeah, there are old people around, and there are people of every blooming age around. Dervla Murphy is somebody we wanted to talk to and still do, and maybe perhaps will. She's only just been 90 this year, well, last year. And she is an absolute marvel of intelligence and humanity and beauty. And there are many others, but they aren't great in the sense that they're known. You know, there are so many wonderful women around the world who are older, and they aren't well known. And it's not necessary for them to be well known, but just to be recognized by the people, you know, just to be recognized by the people who love them. In the olden days, the granny would sit in the corner, you know, she'd be there, and they'd say, she's getting a bit scattered, do you see? Now, this is a difficulty with women who are getting older. Many of my darling friends and the best people in the whole world have been losing touch with what we like to call reality. And that's another thing, you know. So let's not just be too hopeful to get all the older people. Let them off, let them go. They're grand. And they're come again, they come again. You know, this is the fascinating thing about history. If you look back to Ur of the Chaldees or the Mesopotamians or the Greeks, they're going through the same sadness and the same joys that we're going through. It'll never end, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I remember being really struck by that when you and Bernadette came to that conclusion in your chat together, like, which was just like, you know, younger, I suppose you're talking about in the context of activism, but, you know, younger female activists are coming to you going, what do we need to do? And you're both like, we're going to have to do it all over again. You're going to have to keep doing it all over again. Like, yeah.
Well, can I say, Emma, you have certainly inspired me. And I think your concept of just trying to get it out there and get people's voices heard is sort of at the core for me of what journalism is all about. And these are such important voices that you're allowing to be heard, as I said, in the most organic way, as opposed to a sort of a question and answer session. And I think the project is so beautiful and important. And I can't wait to see what you're getting in season 2. All the women that you have your eyes on, and that you get all the funding that you need to get the women that you have your eyes on. And thank you all so much for joining us this evening to have this discussion. I have really, really enjoyed it, and no doubt you're all looking forward as well to seeing what's to come for Mad, Bad and Dangerous. Lelia, go on.
No, and just to say thank you, and you get on to the powers there whom you run RTE with. Tell them to get on with poor old Emma a chance.
Oh, I will do my best, and I promise you that is a commitment I will give you right here, right now. So let's see how I get on with that. Ladies, thank you so much, and would also like to thank the Irish Research Council, NUI Galway, the Bealtaine Festival, By Age and Opportunity at End. So thank you all so much, and if you want to find out more about this, you can go to bealtaine.ie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
We are the ones who will not stay quiet.